It is May-June 1940. The reinforcements have all been placed and the lending resources stage is complete, which means it is now time to determine initiative to see who has the chance to strike first this turn. The initiative marker is located in the +2 box of the Axis, and the Allies won initiative last turn, so the Axis will win any ties on this roll. So let's see what happens. The red die is the Axis die, the green die is the Allied die. We've got a 1 for the Axis, becomes a 3, 10 for the Allies, so the Axis will definitely request a reroll. That's going to slide the marker down 1. Now they only have a +1, and this one will determine it. Again, red die is the Axis die. And the reroll was absolutely worth it. As you can see, it's a 6, becomes a 7 to 1. The Axis have 1 initiative, and they will elect to go first. All right, first up is the weather roll, and it's going to be an important weather roll as there's still a 20% chance of bad weather, and bad weather is really going to hurt the Germans' attempt to drive into France. So let's take a roll and see what happens. Roll is a 5, which should be good enough. May-June 5, it's going to be fair everywhere except North Monsoon, where it's going to be raining, and the impulse marker will only move up 1 box. In the declare war step, there will be no declarations of war by the Axis powers. Italy is considering coming into the war, and I'm sure she's very close. One of the issues is that Italy starts off in a rather tough position in 1939. They have an air force and a navy that have the potential to be pretty decent. However, they do need to be built up, and that requires some time. And Italy's production is just awful. She only has 8 resources and 11 factories, which means she's dependent upon the Germans to reach that maximum production. And ideally, she's going to want at least 4 more resources so that she can save 1 oil from turn to turn for operations. The problem is, as soon as she becomes active in the war and is able to receive those resources from Germany, she becomes very vulnerable to the Allies, particularly her overseas forces. Anything in Africa is in great danger of being cut off and out of supply by the Royal Navy, particularly if it's combined with the French fleet. So the Italians need some time to build up their navy, and yet time is something that they really can't afford, or that the Axis can't afford. Each turn that goes by, they're missing out on that production. And of course, that's assuming that the Germans have those resources to lend her. And early on, until Germany really kind of get some resources in France, she's not in a great position to be lending much to the Italians. So I've seen it go both ways. I've seen games where the Italians come in real early and it's gone very poorly for them, and other games where they've done that and it's turned out all right. So I don't know that there's a single best strategy for Italian entry, or at least the timing of Italian entry in the game. That's one of the things, though, that I do like about WIF, is that there are options for each of the major powers, and it's going to take a lot of games to really kind of fully explore those options, particularly when you consider how one particular major power's strategy works together, combined with their allies' particular strategy in that game. So, but moving on, choosing the actions, since the Italians are remaining neutral for yet another impulse, they will be doing a combined. Germany is going to take advantage of the fantastic weather and do a land, while the Japanese are going to do a naval. I'd like to do some land movement, but again, I don't want to get caught in this cycle of constantly doing repeated combined actions with the Japanese. I'd rather just go ahead and let's do the naval, get all the ships moved that are going to move this turn, and then we can focus on the land war in China. So with that, we have no port attacks, no naval air missions for either the Italians or Japanese, and that brings us up to naval movement. Well, the Japanese have put to sea with all of their transports and a couple of light cruisers carrying some divisions. That's about all they're doing. They are paying as they go rather than paying the oil cost for a full naval impulse. Meanwhile, the Italians are going to take advantage of the protection that neutrality gives them to try to sneak some more reinforcements into North Africa for Balbo here. The Germans have went ahead and paid for their land action. That's 1 or 10/10 oil. And with naval movement done, there is no naval combat. Which brings us up to strategic bombardment, of which there is none. And now we'll be moving into the ground strikes step, which Germany is going to have a few of those. In a land action, Germany gets 4 air missions. And she really wants to try to invert the French artillery unit and the headquarters in this hex. So they're concentrating on this hex and this particular frontline hex to try to invert as many as they can. They are going to spend 4 offensive points in order to get 2 additional air actions above the limit of 4, sending in 3 to each stack. That third bomber is there primarily to absorb any flak they may get from this anti-aircraft unit. So now we're going to wait and see if the French fighters to the south here want to come up and try to intercept either of these missions. The problem the French are facing is that their fighters are pretty well outnumbered. The only saving grace is that few of the German fighters are out of range back here. However, they'd like to use this twin-engine fighter with its pretty good TAC rating as defensive ground support when required, and then they've got the other land bomber here. So they've really got 2 fighters that they're willing to sort of send in as interceptors. But if they send them in now against the ground strikes, they won't be able to intercept or escort their own bombers in any potential upcoming land attacks. So the French are going to rely on their 37mm anti-aircraft guns here to try to inflict as much harm or abort as many attackers from each of these stacks as they can. So with that, let's go ahead. The flak gets 4 shots at any missions that are occurring in its hex or any adjacent hex. So it's within range of both of these hexes. The 4 shots can be broken up any way it desires, and both attacking missions have 3 enemy bombers. So what I think they're going to do is they're going to put 3 shots on the hex here over the headquarters and only 1 shot at this stack. So with this stack, that would be 2 anti-aircraft factors firing at 3 enemy bombers, gives us the lowest of 6. And on the headquarters stack, it's going to be 6 factors shooting at 3 bombers. That's the lowest of 3 rolls on this one. So let's go to the dice tray and see how these resolve. All right, we'll resolve the lowest of 6 single shot first. We'll roll both dice here. There's a 5 and a 7, pretty good start. A 9 and a 9, excellent. And the last 2, we're looking at a 6 and a 7, so really good shooting. And the lowest result is a 5. 5 is going to abort 1 enemy bomber. So the Germans will have to turn back 1 of their 3 attackers. Now, let's go ahead and take the lowest of 3 rolls against the bombers attacking the headquarters stack. So lowest of 3 here. There's a 2 and a 5 and a 1. So not very good here. That 1 is going to turn back 1 factor from 1 of the bombers. So we'll get back to the action in France and see how the results are applied. All right, in the first stack, the lowest result was a 5, which meant that 1 of the 3 bombers is aborted. The Ju-86Gs here are the worst of the 3 going in here, so the Germans will choose to abort this bomber, and he will return to base here at Antwerp. In the other stack, 1 factor has been aborted, and they will take that off of the Heinkel HE-111s here. So when it makes its ground strikes, it will only be rolling as a 1 rather than a 2, and I'll preserve the 4 and the 3. So with the flak attack being resolved, the anti-aircraft unit now is inverted for having fired. And now it's on to resolve the ground strikes themselves. Let's go ahead and start with the frontline unit here. There's a 3-factor BF-110 and a 5-factor Stuka. So we'll go to the dice tray again and see how many French units they can invert. All right, we have a 5 and a 3. Each of the bombers will attack each of the 3 units in the stack. So we'll go top to bottom. The red die will be the Stuka die, and the green die will be the BF-110 dice. So look for a 5 or a 3 for the top division. We've got a red 3 and a green 10. The red 3 hits, that'll invert that one. Next unit down, we have a red 2 and another green 10, but the Stukas will invert the second unit, and now the third unit on the bottom. It is a red 1 and a green 6. So the Stukas did their job, and they have inverted all 3 units in that stack. Next up is the headquarters hex, and that is being attacked by a 4-strength Stuka, a 3-strength Ju-88, and a 1-strength HE-111. So again, we'll use the red die as the 4 Stuka and the green die as the 3-strength Ju-88, and we're attacking the artillery division first. That red 2 is going to invert the division. Next down is the HQ. This is an important roll here. And another red 2 gets the headquarters unit. So they have done their job, even if they end up missing this bottom unit. We've got yet another 2. So the Stukas are ruling the skies over northeast France, this impulse. They are 6 for 6. And that is going to finish up the ground strikes. Now we just need to rebase the aircraft back to Belgium. Check 1, check 2, test. All right, rebasing the aircraft. The 110s are going to return to base here in Brussels. And actually, they are not. They're going to return to base here in Antwerp. And the Stukas will go back to Brussels. The long-range Stukas, I'd like to make sure he's within range of Paris for next turn, or maybe even later this turn if they get reorganized. So that'd be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That'll put him, we'll just put him back here. Well, why don't we put him here? No, we're going to put him here, and we'll send, same thing here. We'll have the Ju-88s go there, and the HE-111s will come back to the forest here, and now we just need to invert the French units. So a spectacularly successful series of ground strikes by the Luftwaffe has really set the German army up to take advantage of the chaos and see if they can exploit the line. For the Germans to be successful in France, they really need to be able to penetrate the Allied wall here along the frontier. And it's kind of a race to see if the Germans can get into France and through that line with a second hex penetration before the Allies have enough time to build up reinforcements and fill it in to form a double line. With the Allies having a double line here, it's going to eliminate the possibility of a quick blitz breakthrough, and it's going to make it much more of a slog for the Germans coming through. It can really just bog them down. I've seen a large number of games where the Germans actually do get stopped here in France and tied down well into 1941, at which point the Axis usually will resign the game. So hopefully the Germans can avoid that fate in this particular playthrough, but that remains to be seen. Next up after the ground strikes should be rail movement. So we'll look at some rail movement. I don't think there's going to be too much of that, and then it'll be on to land movement. All right, neither the Germans nor the Italians had any rail moves. They've done their land movement, just some shifting down in Libya for the Italians over on the Egyptian border in preparation for the reinforcing infantry corps to debark, which it subsequently did. There was no air transport either. We have no invasions. However, we do have a paradrop. The Germans are going to be flying this paratrooper corps, 1, 2, 3, 4, and they're going to be flying the mission here on the inverted stack. Now, the French have 2 fighters, technically 3 fighters that they can intercept with. However, those fighters are going to be escorting bombers in the upcoming anticipated attacks. So they're going to go ahead and let the paradrop go in uncontested, which means the transport can return back to, and we'll just send them back where they were. And we are now on to the land combat step. What I have forgotten to mention is that the Germans are going to use some offensive points to provide a benefit to the Rundstedt headquarters located right here. He has a 4 reorganization value, and that's going to be important in the upcoming land combats. So with his 4 reorganization value, it's going to be 5 plus double his reorg in offensive points, which is a total of 13 offensive points, combined with the 4 that the Germans spent previously for the 2 additional air missions, brings them up to a grand total of 17 offensive points that they've spent in the impulse thus far, leaving them with 13. All right, now that we've marked that, we can go ahead and declare the attacks. The Germans have 2 attacks. Obviously, they have one here where the Fallschirmjäger are dropping. The second attack is going to be here in the forest hex. They're going to have this hex and this hex attack the forest hex along with the top 2 units in this hex, which are a 9-4 infantry and a 4-2 artillery. The bottom unit in this hex, which is a 7-2 militia corps, is going to be attacking this hex along with this entire hex. Rundstedt is going to double 8 units. He's going to double the 2 corps-sized units in each of these 4 hexes. So we are now on to resolving these attacks, and the we'll resolve, well, let's see, first we need to fly some air support for both sides, as well as declare any headquarters support. The Germans have no HQ support for this attack, and the French have no eligible HQs that can provide defensive support. Likewise, although I think it's von Kleist in this hex is attacking, he is not going to provide offensive HQ support. The French will go ahead and have Bilot provide defensive HQ support, even though that means he'll be inverted after the combat, but that will give them a -1 to the die roll. And for air support, the Luftwaffe is flying in some offensive air support, and now, prior to the offensive air support, the attack in the forest here in the woods is 68.5 to 10 with a +1 modifier, as we'll see, for the having more armor and it being a blitz attack. The attack out here to the west is 52 to 11. So as it stands now, the bombers here halved are going to bring this up to 69.5 to 10, and the air power out here is going to bring this one up to 57 to 11. The French Air Force is going to respond. Like I said earlier, they are outnumbered, and they've got 2 attacks to deal with. Any ground support they send here is going to be halved due to the forest, and they would be, if they concentrated everything here, whatever got through would be therefore less effective. You're looking at a pretty much a 7-to-1 on the blitz right now in this hex. Even if they sent both of these bombers in, it's going to give them maybe a 6-to-1 or 5-to-1, which would be even. Chances are the Germans are going to be able to take that hex. Now, if they instead send both of these bombers out here, they could potentially have up to a 19 defense in that hex. And rather than split their Air Force and allow it to be chewed up piecemeal, they're going to keep it concentrated, and they're going to commit everything they've got to trying to stop the German breakthrough here. The MS-406s will be escorting, and the P-36s, not that it really matters in this case because the French have bombers going in, but they'll be intercepting / escorting as well. So now for the Germans' response, the French have 2 fighters, and they have a fighter acting as a bomber, giving them 2 bombers. Their fighter strength, they're both 4 fighters, so the max fighter strength the French have or can muster is a 5. So with that in mind, and knowing that the French have just committed their entire Air Force here, the Germans don't really need to hold too much back for future impulses, at least as far as the French Air Force is concerned. So they will intercept with 6, 7. They're going to send in quite a bit in an effort to prevent the any of the French bombers getting through. So we've got, as you can see, usually the bigger the stack, the more important the hex is. And right now, this is the focal point of the entire Western Front. I believe the Germans are looking at 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 to 5, that's a +4, -4. Just considering the only other fighter they have that can reach is this 109 here. I would give them a +5, -5, but there are still RAF units which could get up to some no good. So +4, +5, the Germans are pretty comfortable with that. So let's go ahead and resolve what is clearly the biggest air battle to date. All right, here we can see each side has arrayed their fighter and bomber streams with the front fighter and front bomber for each side located here. The air-to-air values are going to be a 4 + 1 for the French, a total of 5 versus a 6, 7, 8, 9. So 9 - 5 for the Germans gives them a +4, and the French are a -4. The non-phasing player rolls first, so the first French attack on the -4 is a pretty good roll. It's a 6. A 6 on the -4 is defender aborts front fighter or front bomber. So the Germans will go ahead and they're going to end up aborting their front fighter, but that happens after they make the return attack. These are simultaneous. So first roll for the Germans on the 4 to 5 column is an 11. Things not starting off well for the Germans. The defender clears through any one bomber. So the French will clear through one of their bombers. The fighter bomber will make it through, and the Germans are going to be forced to abort their front fighter. With the second round coming up, both sides are going to stay in the fight. We need to recalculate the air-to-air values, though. The French remain a 5. The Germans now are a 6, 7, 8. So it becomes a +3, -3. So -3, same column for the French as before. And they roll a 19. It took them a while to show up, but the French have definitely shown up. A 19 on the -3 column is a DX. The defender will destroy their own front fighter or front bomber. Tough choice for the Germans here, but I think they're going to go ahead and eliminate. No, he is more expensive. Yep, they're going to go ahead and eliminate the naval air there. The return shot at a +3 is a 15. 15 for the Germans on +3. That is defender destroys front fighter or front bomber. Well, the whole point of this is to try to save the ground hex. So the French will destroy their front fighter. However, unlike the Germans, the pilot of the Marine Saulnier 406s will survive. So air combat starting to get a little bloody here in the second round. That brings us on to the third round. Recalculating things, it's back to a 6, 7, 8 to 4. It's still a +4, -4. The French are going to press their luck and see if they can inflict some more damage, even if they can't hold on to the hex or get their bombers through. Perhaps they can make it a little costly for the Germans. So here we go. First roll for round 3, -3. I'm sorry, -4. And they are going to do just that, a 17. 17 just misses. It's an attacker aborts front fighter or front bomber. Well, now they're starting to feel like they might have a shot here, although they're going to have to survive an attack. Do they abort the German 6 fighter, making it a much more even contest at +2, -2, or do they go ahead and turn back the bombers? Let's go ahead and turn back the bombers. So that's the second German aircraft aborted from the fight. So now we're looking at a +4 column attack by the Germans. It is a 9, which is usually not a very good attack. However, because it's so lopsided, it is a D8, defender aborts. So now they've got a decision to make. If they abort the bomber, then there's really no point, since there are no German bombers remaining of the fighter sticking around, and they can end the combat at the end of the round here. If they abort their front fighter in an effort to try to get the second bomber through, he would be looking at a 6, 7, 8 to 3. It would be a +5, -5, which is starting to border on the suicidal, especially considering as the Germans haven't been rolling all that great so far. Yeah, they'll go ahead and consider their job done and quit while they're ahead, so to speak. So at the end of the, I think the third round of combat, there are no bombers remaining. The Germans are willing to stick around. They'll be more than happy to try to finish off this lone French fighter. However, since his job is done, having gotten half of the bombers through, as well as having shot down some German bombers, he is going to abort, which will end the combat. So there you have it, a rather gallant stand by the heavily outnumbered and outclassed Armée de l'Air. So we'll see if that has any kind of negative impact on the impending German attack. All right, back at the front to resolve the ground attack now. All of the air units involved in the air battle have been rebased, except for the French bombers who made it through. They're going to add their 3 factors in ground support, and then they will rebase before the combat is resolved. I'm going to rebase, let's rebase someplace a little safer, say back here. All right, with the results of the air battle, the raw odds now are 52 attacking factors to 14 defending factors. The French need to make a decision whether they're going to include the notional unit or not that's present due to the paradrop that's come in. If they include the notional, that's going to add 2 to their defense, making it a 16 in the hex. However, it will give an additional +1 to the Germans for a notional unit being face down. Since going from 14 to 16 does not change the odds at all, there's no reason to give the Germans an extra +1, so the French will ignore the notional. So we're looking at 3 to 1 on the Blitz table, and modifiers. The die roll is going to be modified. All 3 of the French units are face down, so that's going to be a +3. In a Blitz combat, the Germans have more attacking armor or HQ armor or mechanized, with the mechanized corps there. So they're going to get another +1 for that to bring it to +4, and then they get a +1 for 1 or more para dropping into the hex. So it's a 3 to 1 +5. So the Germans will take the hex. However, in order to actually get their blitz result that they're looking for, they're going to need a 3 or better. So let's see if the French Air Force's efforts were in vain or not. It's 3-1 plus 5. Here's the attack. And it is a 6, which is going to make it an 11 for the final result. Checking the blitz table, an 11 at 3-1 is an asterisk to blitz. So the Germans actually, despite the failure of the Luftwaffe, are still able to get the job done on the ground. The French will destroy 2 of these units, and because they can trace a supply path back to a supply source, the 3rd one's going to end up on the spiral as a reinforcement next turn. And we're going to destroy the division as the first loss, and we'll take the garrison unit as the second loss, and then the infantry corps will go over on the spiral as a reinforcement for July-August. Put these guys back in the force pool. Now the Fallschirmjäger, they will land in the hex and they will be turned face down because all Fallschirmjäger units, when they're para-dropped, end up face down at the end of the drop. Now the Germans are going to advance after combat. And because the hex, it's fine weather, the hex only costs 1, the blitz-capable units will be able to advance a second hex. So that's going to be this stack here with the self-propelled AT guns, the mech unit, and the motorized unit. They're going to advance into the hex of the combat and 1 to the west. All right, they're going to end up out here. Now, because that lone para is a little vulnerable there, the infantry corps from this other hex, the militia, is going to advance into there. And that is going to complete that combat. We've got 1 more over here to the southeast, coming through the Ardennes. Now in this one, the German bombers come through unopposed, so they will add their 2 factors. It's halved for the terrain, so they only add 1 in ground support. The French have a defense of 10. With the air support, the Germans are attacking at 69.5 to 10. That 69.5 is going to round to 70. That's going to be 7-1, and it will be on the blitz table because of the German armor units in this hex, if I can get to them without completely disrupting all of the stacks here. You can see the armor and the mech there. And there we go. A 7-1 on the blitz table. It's going to be -1 for the French defensive headquarters support. So we'll flip him over. But that's not going to matter because the 7-1 column is an automatic asterisk to blitz. So again, the French will destroy 2 units. They will take this division as the first loss, and they will take this infantry corps as the second loss. They're going to go into the force pool, and the headquarters unit will end up being placed on the spiral as a reinforcement for next turn. The aircraft, he should have rebased prior, but we'll just send him back to here. Now it comes time to advance after combat. The Germans, even though they got the B result, they're unable to take that second hex because this hex has a movement cost for these motorized units greater than 1. So they are restricted to just advancing the single hex. However, that's enough for them, as the Germans have now punched 2 holes in the Allied line. They've blitzed through here. Things are not looking good for the French at the moment. However, we'll see what the Western Allies can do in response to this, and perhaps they can try and salvage the situation, patch something up here to slow the Germans down. I don't think there was any attacks in Asia. The Japanese did their naval. So moving on from land combat, it is now the air rebase phase. None of that. On to reorganization. Rundstedt, having used the offensive points to give him that land action benefit, he can reorganize up to twice his reorg value in land units that are within his range of 4 here. So the only one that's face down actually is the Fallschirmjäger. So we'll get the Fallschirmjäger turned back face up. And I believe that's all he's got going on. So at the end of the impulse, he's going to be turned face down here in Brussels. And that is it for the Germans' first impulse of the May-June turn. It was a very successful turn for them, and we'll see if the Allies can try to slow them down or maybe turn things around in their upcoming impulse. So over to take a look at the beginning of the Allied impulse. The situation is looking pretty grim for the Allies right now. They've got a couple of holes in the front line here that they need to plug. They would like to be able to cut these guys out of supply, and that means attacking the Berlin militia with the Fallschirmjägers here. Unfortunately, the French and Commonwealth don't cooperate, so they cannot both attack the hex there, which means it's going to be either all on the Commonwealth or all on the French. The French are really handicapped by the fact that all of these units are face down, so they can't do anything this impulse until they're turned face up, which is going to mean that a single hex attack here from the south by the French, and again their flak unit is turned face down, so it's not going to be able to attack, which means we're looking at a potential British counterattack. They're only going to be able to get 2 hexes on this hex, and they've got 11 here and 13 here. The best they can hope for is a 24 to 11, which is only a 2 to 1. They could use a blitz attack since they do have the mech and there are no German blitz capable units in the hex, but there's a big old 4 artillery here which could provide defensive ground support to the hex, making that a 15, and there would be nothing the Commonwealth could do to prevent that. As far as air support, they've got 2 bombers up here. They could fly in and try to invert the units, but with a 3 and a 2, the chances aren't very good. Maybe they get 1, which would give them a +1. So realistically, they're looking at maybe a 1-to-1 +1 on the blitz, which is not very good odds. That could end up resulting in a lot of dead Commonwealth troops, because they will be all turned face down and the Germans will just go ahead and chew them up in subsequent impulses. Maybe that distracts the Germans from Paris, or the Germans just simply ignore them since they're face down and continue to drive. So it's a very, very long shot to be able to do anything to this hex here. So does that mean the Commonwealth needs to look at evacuating? They can. They have 2 port hexes here and here that they can pull troops out of, and they have plenty of transports waiting out here. They cannot simply pull the headquarters out without stranding the rest of their troops there. So what they may do is start a phased withdrawal. So they may end up doing a land impulse or land action for this first impulse. The French are definitely going to do a land action. The question is, how are they going to plug these gaps here They'll probably take their reserves out of Paris and move them up here and try to bring up some guys from the south of France and maybe from the east over here, shift some over. But they're basically just trying to buy time. They should get hopefully a decent amount of reinforcements next turn, but things are not looking good. So with that in mind, the Chinese, French, and Commonwealth are going to do land actions. The USSR and USA are going to do combines. So I'll go ahead and take care of the naval stuff with the combined folks, and we'll see what the Allied line looks like after some land movement to reshuffle things around. Well, the Chinese were content to kind of sit pat where they were. The Soviets continue to slowly redeploy some units into eastern Poland. In the west here, the British Expeditionary Force has pulled back out of Belgium, and the mechanized and motorized corps have moved to the coast in anticipation of being evacuated shortly. And the French did, in fact, plug their gaps here by shifting some units westwards from the Maginot and moving their Paris garrison out of the capital. Now that the German Fallschirmjäger have landed and the ATR is face down, there's no threat of a sudden paradrop on Paris. At least for the rest of this turn. And they're also moving some troops up from the south. It's a thin line. We'll see whether or not it's going to hold. There's not much else the Allies can do the rest of this impulse, so that should do it for their first impulse. The marker is going to move up just one box on the impulse track, and it is now the Axis second impulse. Let's go ahead and roll forward.